to each and every one of you. Welcome to THM06, Multicultural Diversity in Workplace class. This is Ma'am Venise Ocampo, your instructor in THM06. For today's lesson, in continuation of Module 2.1, which is the Introduction to Cross-Cultural Communication, we're going to discuss now Module 2.2, which is the Overcoming Cultural Barriers. For the learning objectives, after reading the module or after you watch this lesson video, you should be able to, number 1, explain the definition of cultural barrier. Number 2, state examples of cultural barriers in a workplace. So now let's begin discussing overcoming cultural barriers. But before that, let us first define what do we mean by the term barriers. So I know that you are now thinking, what is the definition of the word barrier? So when we say barrier, usually these are something such as a fence or a wall. Or in Tagalog, this is what we call balakid or harang na tinatawag. So in cross-cultural communication, we've talked about some of the barriers such as language barriers. We also have cultural barriers. And now it's time for us to define what is cultural barriers. So according here, the prime dynamics of a culture are the mutual social perceptual set with coordinated meaning and action and cultural variance. The differences in communication recital and the diverse form of communication can create diversity among various cultures. People who live in various cultures and historical epoch communicate differently and have different patterns of thoughts. So when we say epoch, this is what we call era. Okay? So tayo, iba-iba tayo ng pinanggalingan. We came from different places, we came from different family backgrounds, we came from different family history. We have our own experiences. So it is very important for us to understand those differences in order for us to prevent this what we call cultural barriers. So a cultural barrier in communication occurs mainly when communication happens between two different cultural backgrounds. Because as I've mentioned many times, we are a diverse people. It means iba-iba tayo, we are different. So, nangyayari lang yung cultural barrier if two people meet without even understanding one another. So, ibig sabihin, magkaiba. Nag-usap yung magkaibang tao. So, magkaiba rin sila ng standpoint or pananaw sa buhay. We encounter cultural barriers in everyday life. In age of globalization and digital media, the whole world is performing and participating on one platform. So especially Facebook nowadays, you are very into Facebook. You are very, let's say, attentive when it comes to the posts of different artists, posts of your friends, or posts of your, let's say, classmates. So the communication nowadays is really flexible, especially during the pandemic. But to further discuss what is cultural barriers, this occurs when people of different cultures, okay, so take note of this. So people of different cultures are unable, okay, unable to understand each other. Okay. So it occurs when people of different cultures are unable to understand each other's customs. So when that happens, it results to an inconvenience or difficulties. So ibig sabihin, pag hindi natin naintindihan yung isa't isa, hindi tayo nagkaintindihan, talagang magkakaroon ng problema. That's why other people are being misunderstood. Kasi hindi nila naiintindihan yung isa't isa. That's why other people are quitting their jobs because they don't really know their purpose. Hindi na nila maintindihan kung bakit pa sila nag-i-stick sa job na yon. Hindi na nila maintindihan kung bakit pinapagalitan sila lagi ng mga boss nila. Hindi nila maintindihan kung bakit ang daming customers ang unsatisfied sa mga products and services. Because there are barriers. Merong mga balakid, merong mga hadlang kung bakit nangyayari yung mga ganong bagay. So according to a author or according to a person, if we seek to understand a people, we have to try to put ourselves as far as we can in that particular historical and cultural background. One has to recognize whatever the future may hold, countries and people differ in their approach to life and their ways of living and thinking. In order to understand them, we have to understand their way of life and approach. If we wish to convince them, we have to use their language as far as we can. Not language in the narrow sense of the word, but language of mind that is one necessity. So it is very helpful because this quotation really reflects everything or summarize everything that I'm going to explain. So in the first sentence, in order for us to understand other people, we need to put our shoes in their shoes. Okay? It means, ilagay natin yung sarili natin sa posisyon nila. Intindihin natin yung posisyon nila or itry natin na isipin, what if ako yung tao na yun? What if nandun ako sa ganong situation na yun? So one has to recognize whatever the future may hold. Ibig sabihin, we need to recognize, we need to acknowledge that we are really different from one another. We have different ways on how we are going to think. Iba-iba tayo ng way ng pag-iisip. Iba-iba tayo ng pamumuhay, kung paano tayo mabubuhay everyday. We have different lifestyle. So in order for us to understand one another, we have to understand those two things. The way of life and the way on how are we going to approach the people. Now, if we want to convince our guests, if we want to convince our business partner, we really need to use a proper language as far as possible or as much as possible. Because it means that if you're talking to a Japanese person, please try hard to learn the Japanese language also. Because kung ikaw yung may kailangan, sabi nga, dapat ikaw yung mag-adjust. 'Di ba? Kung ang kausap mo is American, don't expect that person to talk Tagalog or to talk a Filipino language. Because that will not happen at all. So, ibig sabihin, you really need to adjust from other people. And same with other people. They really need to adjust towards you, towards the situation. So, if we wish to convince them, we have to use the sense of the language, not the language in a narrow sense of the word. Ibig sabihin, huwag tayo yung makitid yung pag-iisip. We really need to be open-minded. We really need to open our minds, our hearts, lalong-lalo na kapag tayo is nagtatrabaho na. Because anything can happen. Anything can happen. It can be positive. It can be negative. So, it means that we have to really think strong and move strong sa ating workplace or act strong. So, that is one of the necessity. Ibig sabihin, yung mga pinag-usapan natin na to or the whole quotation, this is very important. This is necessary. So, please bear that in your mind. So, culture is a pattern. So, culture is a pattern of taken for granted assumptions about how a given collection of people should think, act, feel as they go about their daily affairs. So, talagang nakasama rin sa culture yun. The way we think, the way we act, the way we feel. So, cultural barriers is when people of different cultures are unable to understand each other. So, as mentioned a while ago. So, what are the sources of cultural barriers? So, saan nga ba nagmumula? Ano ba yung pinagmumulan kung bakit may mga cultural barriers na tinatawag? Bakit hindi natin maintindihan yung ibang nationality? Ba't hindi natin maintindihan yung ibang tao na may ibang kultura? So number 1 is the language or the semantic. So it is very obvious that language is one of the most crucial barrier in cross-cultural communication. Since verbal communication is important in every context, the understandings of the meaning of words are also important. So ibig sabihin, verbal, ayan, katulad ko, I am talking, I am recording the lesson. So it is very important for me that before I talk, before I explain everything, I need to read first the lesson. I need to understand first the lesson. I need to research further so I can share a lot of knowledge, a lot of additional information to all of you. Because we cannot really do the written communication every time. So written communication is not really applicable at all times. We really need to talk, we really need to use yung verbal communication or oral communication na tinatawag. So we also have the language disability, physical language disability, wherein nami-misunderstood natin yung ibang tao. Other people, talagang merong mga sakit or may mga conditions na they are stuttering, ibig sabihin na uutal-utal yung pagsasalita nila, to the sense na yung ibang tao, tinatawanan na bakit ganyan yan magsalita, may sakit ba yan or whatsoever. So ibig sabihin, it is very, it is very unethical to do that because hindi natin alam kung ano yung nangyayari sa isang tao. Hindi natin alam kung sakit ba yon or normal lang or meron nang nangyari sa kanya before. So, meron ding mga tao, let's say for example, mute and deaf. So, pipit bingi, how can you expect them to deliver an accurate information? But nowadays, marami na talagang techniques, marami ng ways, marami ng mga paraan kung paano malilesen yung mga ganong klaseng situation na may kinalaman sa language. So, number 2 is cultural norms and values. So, when we say norms, these are the standards we live by a shared expectation and rules that are guided by the people within social groups. Sa pag sinabi nating norms, ito yung mga standard. Okay? Standard o let's say yung mga dapat talaga nating ginagawa or yung mga talagang tingin ng mga tao within the society. So si norms, it can be learned or reinforced. Ibig sabihin, pwedeng matutunan or pwedeng ang nag-instill na sa inyo niyan is yung mga parents ninyo, mga friends, mga teachers, or even yung mga nakakasama nyo sa araw-araw na buhay ninyo, lalong-lalo na sa society. So what are the example of cultural norms? Let's say for example, sa mga lalaki or sa mga men. So often likely ang standards na nila or ang standard na nakikita ng society is that men should be strong all the time. Men should not show emotions. 'Di ba? But it is really let's say impossible because not all men are strong. Not all men are, let's say, not all men are fierce. Not all men are hard-headed. So, there are men, okay, may mga lalaki talaga na they are willing to show emotions, they are sweet, diba? They are, let's say, caring, they are compassionate with other people. So, ibig sabihin, pag sinabi kasi nating norm, parang stereotyping. Ito na yung standard na nakikita natin sa society. But actually, itong standard na to, pwedeng mabago. Because sabi ko nga, iba-iba tayo. We have different experiences. We have different ways on how are we going to live. For example, women should be caring and nurturing. But not all women are really caring. Not all women are sweet. Not all women are, let's say, talkative. Not all women are clingy. So, iba-iba siya. So, each culture holds its own values and meaning and norms different from one another. This difference is caused because of the truth, belief, and judgment through which they acquired knowledge about society and culture. So, next one is stereotypes or stereotyping. So, as mentioned a while ago, these are the negative image or the preconceived notions on a particular community and identity. These are created through mass media and their content agenda. So, si stereotyping, anything that is negative image. Yung hindi na maganda yung pinapakita. Na typically, ang nangyayari na, nagkakaroon na ng judgment na tinatawag. O nagkakaroon na ng hindi magandang identity yung isang community, yung isang tao, yung isang employee, or yung isang company. So example ng stereotyping, women aren't smart as men. Hindi daw kasing talino ng mga lalaki ang mga babae. So do you agree with that personally? Mas matalino ba ang mga lalaki? Or mas matalino ang mga babae? Or you meet halfway? Everyone can be educated. Everyone can be smart. Diba? So, in a workplace, hindi naman tayo pwedeng magpatalinuhan because hindi naman yun competition. You are not in a competition. You are working towards the success of a company. Diba? So, stereotyping is really a negative one na kaya tayo nagkakaroon ng cultural barrier. So, we need to stop that preconceived notion. We really need to stop thinking about a certain idea na applicable sa lahat. Because women are smart, and same with men, and same with other gender. The LGBTQ community are smart also. It depends upon on how are you going to deliver those knowledge and wisdoms that you have. Next one is the values and beliefs. Values tell us about people's behavior. Values may be explicit or implicit. So what is the difference between the two? So when we say explicit, this is fully revealed. Okay? So fully revealed or express. Or, yung sinasabi natin na implicit, these are suggested but not communicated directly. So those are the differences. So si explicit, stated overtly in a value judgment because sabi nga dyan, it is fully revealed or expressed. So ito yung mga values natin na kayang-kaya natin ipakita, kayang-kaya natin i-express, kayang-kaya natin, let's say, ipakita sa mga tao. While si implicit, it is a non-verbal behavior. Non-verbal, ibig sabihin, usually hindi talaga natin ito na-i-express, di natin nasasabi. So, ang nangyayari sa implicit values, more on suggestion. Pero hindi nga siya directly na i-communicate. Hindi mo directly nasasabi. So, and they may be individually held or seen as a part of cultural pattern or system. May mga beliefs, may mga paniniwala tayo na talagang visible. 'Di ba? Nakikita talaga ng lahat na you're a Catholic, you're a born again, you're a Christian, you're an INC. But may mga values na hindi natin talaga na-express. Kung na-express man natin siya, or yung mga beliefs na yan, paminsan-minsan lang. So, the last one is the body language and gestures. So, body language and gestures are other elements of cultural barriers. It is impossible to communicate without body language and gestures. So, sabi nga nila, para daw mas kapani-paniwala yung sinasabi ng isang tao, there should be feelings. There should be gestures. You cannot say I love you towards a person without even, let's say, showing a emotion. You cannot even say I miss you without hugging a person kung nasa harap mo siya. You cannot say kay guest na welcome to Harvest Hotel without even being happy na welcome sila. 'Di ba? So, ibig sabihin, body language and gestures are also important. At syempre, minsan yung mga gestures natin, yung mga ginagawa natin, yung mga actions natin, nami-misunderstood ng iba or talagang mali yung ginagawa. Kaya nagkakaroon ng cultural barrier. Of course, when you say, welcome to Harvest Hotel, you need to smile. Hindi pwedeng dapat nakasimangot ka. Mafe-feel nigas yun na hindi ka interesado, na parang wala ka sa mood. So in that case, pwedeng mas unsatisfied agad si guest or pwede na agad siyang madismaya sa services na ino-offer ng mismong establishments. So how are we going to overcome cultural barriers? So as mentioned a while ago, so we are just going to summarize this. So, the following are the points which we need to keep in mind to avoid cultural barriers in communication. Avoid frame of reference, use mutual language and signs, ask questions when in doubt, provide space for mutual respect, open to new ideas, accepting and adapting the different cultures, understand the context of communication, avoid stereotype notion, promote positive reception of cultural divergences, and learn about other cultures and their norms. So, all of it are the ways on how are we going to overcome cultural barrier. So, all of those key points are also stated a while ago during our discussion. So, ang pinaka-importante lang naman, in order for us to avoid cultural barriers, is of course to have a proper communication. Kasi doon naman talaga lahat nagsisimula ang lahat, sa pakikipag-usap. So, if there is a problem, you need to talk about the problem. So, talk to the right people, talk directly to the people involved and not to the people who are not involved. Because usually, doon lang mas lalaki yung problem. So for the references, so you can either visit communicationstheory.org for further references or other informations stated in our module. So if you ever miss some points in our lesson video, feel free to replay the video or even download the video in YouTube. So thank you so much for listening in our today's lesson. So keep updated in our Edmodo class so you can see the posted activities that I am going to post. So thank you so much for listening in our today's lesson. See you again next time and keep safe.